Today I will start this presentation called Zero to Trillions, and we'll talk about how we scale the warehouse at Canva to fulfill all the business requirements. The agenda that we have for today, it's focused on 4 different business problems that we faced along the way. And the first one will be accelerating insights, the next one scaling for growth, followed by faster data onboarding, and we will wrap up with special data access. I'm sure that many of you will relate to these business problems, very common in our field, so let's jump in. The first one today is accelerating the insights. So a bit of a context here, roughly 2 years ago, and a bit more, a bit less, when I joined the company, the main business problem was how slow the access to insights was. Back then, the warehouse builds were taking more than 20 hours. It was crazy, and it was keep going up and up and up. Our data engineering team at the time, it was made by just a few folks. We were like more or less like 5-ish, and we were looking into different things. And in my case, I was the main one looking after the warehouse. So this is the first scenario that I was presented to. Very slow access to insights. The builds were taking plus than 20 hours. So then I started digging up and seeing why all these issues were, happening. The first thing that I noticed is that every day we were parsing all the JSON. We were repeating operations on a daily basis, which was like very low performance. And we were also, to my surprise, building the warehouse using full builds instead of incremental. So facts, reports, we were building this from scratch every day, which now sounds crazy to me. So the solution that we came up with was a big investment in foundations. And one of the first things that I did to kind of clean up the house was to introduce a layered architecture in the data warehouse, very common practice in data warehousing. We have like different places or layers where the data will be stored in a particular way to fulfill different business needs. This allowed me to then implement the incremental builds and save a lot of time when I was building facts and reports on an incremental fashion rather than from scratch. And finally, what I also did was standardizing the ingestion methods. The warehouse was growing. We had MySQL snapshots, events, and a few other events from the front end and back end. Everything was ingested in very different ways. So we standardized it, and now we were loading everything from a single place, which is the data lake. So what was the impact on this initiative? Well, it was a stronger team and tech. The builds were like much faster. We reduced the build time more than 6 hours, which it was like also cost savings and ultimately a happier analyst team. And last but not least, the solid foundations on the warehouse. More automation, less operation. This led us to focus on bigger problems. And I cannot underestimate how important it is to have a solid foundation. It requires a bit of early investing, but then it will open the doors for many, many more opportunities in the future. So moving on to the next section, we have scaling for growth. So this was shortly after we solved the incremental builds and had layers. The problem hit us again. The build time was continuing to increase because naturally we had more customers, more users, more data, more different services that we needed to support. So the build time was going up. Back then, we were using a solution that was not elastic, and this was the main problem. We couldn't just, you know, extend the warehouse capabilities to be able to process more and more information. Rather, we needed to upgrade into a different tier, which will be more or less fine until a few months down the line. So it was like a very rigid warehouse solution that we were using. And due to these facts, it was also pretty hard, if not impossible, to handle very, very large data sets. And as a consequence, the low velocity of contribution was another problem that we were facing. Even though the analytics team was growing, and it's one of the data teams that has grown the most in the last couple of years, still the contributions were very slow because we needed to test, and there was not much, free compute and resources on the warehouse to go through all of these steps. So what we started working towards was migrating into a different solution. We implemented a few technology changes, and the main one being Snowflake and dbt. After a few evaluations on different warehouse solutions, we decided to go with Snowflake. And the main sell point back then for me was, the flexibility that Snowflake provides and the JSON support, which it was like very, very impressive and important in retrospective. And moving out from our previous warehouse platform, we needed to we needed to have a solution to handle all the orchestration of the SQL models. Our previous solution did have something similar to dbt, not even close to being that powerful and useful, but there was an orchestration method. So by moving out from that solution, we needed to jump into something new. I knew about dbt for a while, but as I say, I was like pretty much fighting fires and I didn't have the time to evaluate the product. So at this point in time, we need to migrate the warehouse. We may as well just take a look at dbt. And finally, we embrace both changes. Doing the migration, it's a big task, and you have to rewrite a bunch of code, adapt for the new technology, so on and so forth. So what we came up with is an approach of using templates and generating a bunch of code. So then we were able to, with a few days or weeks, we generated a bunch of code and got all the raw data loading into the warehouse. This, again, it was more automation, less operation, more free time. There was another change in this part of the solution because as we changed the technology, we needed to change some processes and the team as well. We wanted, from the warehouse team point of view, we wanted to get away from the analytics, so to speak. At this point in time, Canva was growing in size, so was the data specialists. And we have a warehouse team in which I'm a part of, and we have a bigger analytics team. The last one is the one responsible to creating the transformation and all the business logic models. So we wanted to give them ownership. We only provided SQL code reviews to make sure that they were performant for the next for this new tech stack, but ultimately they were the code owners. And yes, we were involved on request, usually for query optimization or large deployments. So the impact that this change had was massive. And we could say that analytics went through the roof. We were able to handle now complex analytics models such as session, marketing attribution, search impressions. At Canva, these are like very, very big scale data sets that before we weren't able to handle, and now we could. Contributions skyrocket. So if you take a look at the chart that we have from GitHub here, like all the commits went just like through the roof. Very, very good momentum and accelerating at that point in time. And same, thanks to the elasticity of Snowflake, we were able to reduce the daily builds even down to 5 hours. A few lessons learned that I can share with you guys, because yeah, this is also quite important in retrospective. It's about communication and training. Whenever you're doing such a big project, especially if you're migrating to new lands, communication can never be underestimated. We could have done this a little bit better, and yeah, can always do this a bit better. Now we use we do use design docs for proposing changes and reviewing, and then this is the first step of a new project. So that's something positive that I like about Canva, and highly encourage to all of you folks to take a look at that. Training is another very, very important one. We should have had more training with the analytics teams. Yeah, we did have a few. It's not that we just left them alone, but the more, the better. At the same time, the analytics team was like hiring really, really fast. So if I was running a training session today, 1 month or 2 months or 3 months down the line, there was a new cohort of people that didn't really know about these things because they missed it. So what we are doing now is we are recording every session we are doing about training or knowledge sharing. And we have like even a YouTube channel private to ourselves in which we upload every single content. And it's really, really great for onboarding newbies. We had great feedback from everyone there. I'm taking a look at the questions that are coming up into the chat. What was your former data warehouse? Don't want to dunk on them. Yeah, it was good. It was good. They have many features. They have connectors. They have this orchestration tool. It was good for a medium-sized company, which just outgrew their capacity. What is the new balance between data engineers and data analysts, like role responsibilities? Well, in terms of responsibilities, is we, the warehouse engineer, we take care of the load, all the integration with different services. And then analytics team, they create all the transform, all the business logic, fact, dimensions, reports, dashboards, so to speak. We do collaborate on some code reviews for performance issues. Rough size of the data you were handling. Well, the biggest one we have is trillions. So that's the name of the session. A little more about design docs. Yeah, I will share something about design docs later on the chat. Okay, just conscious of the time, biggest challenge for analysts new to this way of working. I'll jump to that one now. Okay, so this concludes the first half of the presentation. I will hand over now to Krishna.
So Jose just gave us the first two chapters of our journey, and this really follows on from where Jose left off. And now I would like to talk about how we onboarded not Canva's first-party datasets, but our datasets coming from outside Canva. So next slide, please. Thank you. So the challenge at hand for us in data engineering was that we had to build integrations to third-party data sets that are very useful, like Facebook, Braze, Mandrill. And the process for building these integrations is involved. Understanding the APIs, developing, testing, and then deploying it in a nice way. So After our migration, when we started doing these integrations with third-party data, we would spend maybe anywhere between a week to 3 weeks to get these integrations built. While this time, during this time, you can imagine that the marketing folks and the data analysts are blocked. Not only are they blocked, but they also can't see the value of this data and make a determination if this data is actually valuable. Furthermore, another challenge was once we got these data sets going and integrated, we had to make sure that we're on top of any API changes, schema changes, which means more time to build and deploy. And lastly, there were so many of these. Marketing analytics mainly has lots of these data sets that we can integrate with. And it was difficult to standardize, automate. And to be honest, for the engineering team that was building these, it wasn't the most rewarding of tasks. So we decided to go with Fivetran, a data integration platform that we tested out. And it literally made things so much easier for us. The hard work of integrating with a multitude of third-party datasets was done. It was a point-and-click interface. We did some initial setup in terms of setting up a process for getting data requests in, but we tried to maintain it so that the ownership of these datasets and these integrations remained with the business as much as possible. So we would request authentication details from marketing, for example, and then we would set them up initially. And then we would really say this data set is owned by you, and we would support. So data analytics and data engineering play a supporting role in the ownership of these data sets. And the impact of this is that we got more access to richer data in less time, giving us the ability to go from weeks that it used to take to hours. And it unblocked a lot of time for the analytics team and for the data eng team, because then we could focus on the governance aspect of these data sets, onboarding, offboarding these new data sets, and we could also focus on some of the more challenging integrations for which we could build connected and introduce a release framework so that these can be actually driven by the analysts instead. And we have examples of two connectors in production right now that were entirely built by the analysts with very little support from data eng. I say that this is not a silver bullet for every ingestion scenario, and I just added a few tips and learnings from our experience. So generally speaking, if it's a very large data set, I think you're better off trying to use the warehouse bulk load tools. Now, the numbers that I've given here are indicative only. It's from our experience. The context in your organization might be different, but that's what we found. Also, the initial syncs with the third-party datasets might take a while, and by a while I mean several days. So just important to manage expectations with your stakeholders, because it's not always point and click and you have data in the next hour. Finally, we also use the CSV and Google Sheets integrations that are available in Fivetran. Analysts and anyone using the data warehouse love these because they can put in external data sets quickly into the warehouse, very convenient. So really, self-regulation and periodic checks is really recommended when it comes to these ad hoc data sets. Next slide, please. Okay, so having a warehouse, being able to scale, having a very code-generated first-party data ingestion process, and faster onboarding for third-party data sets, we now had a lot of momentum going our way. Now, this was really opening the doors for lots of other folks that normally didn't use the data warehouse to come on board. And with that came special data access requirements. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, diverse data access. So, as soon as we had this nice platform built, we had requests from our internal teams to have access to PII, access to all sorts of things, really. And we generally, for general Canva access to the warehouse, we hide PII, but some use cases do need this. So that was something that we had to deal with. As other teams saw the power of Snowflake and our data platform, they wanted to use, and also, I should add, all the great content, all the great data sets have built. Content is king after all. Many more people wanted to use these data sets in conjunction with theirs. So this was external folks and internal teams. As an example, an internal team that wanted to use our model data team. We'll get to have this challenge as well. And finally, and part of the press it's on right now, we're trying to build more data apps.
We had diverse data access requests, different levels of access. Some cases they do need PII, even though we naturally hid in the warehouse, but there were cases in which they needed. And different sharing extracts, it was also required, and therefore, yeah, we saw this trend of new applications built on top of the data that we had in the warehouse. That was the problem at the time. So as a solution, we introduced the concept of data marts, a very common data warehouse principle. Is just a dedicated place in the warehouse with specific data and access for a particular business unit or team. So we separate a special access to handle PII data in different data marts with restricted access. We gave owners, in GitHub using code owners, and we were able to basically hand over every ownership to those team members that are the ones who should rule and what's happening in that area of the warehouse. And we dedicated resource onto them. This is like a Snowflake feature that we were able to give them their own compute unit tailored to their requirements. So basically, we gave them, a place and resources for them to go crazy. Solution around like data sharing and extracts. What we usually do is extracting to S3. So that was the main output that we had from the warehouse, usually done by DBT models running on particular data marts, in the context of a data mart. And then we make use of DBT post hooks and the copy command. So then we can get the data out into S3. And this S3 bucket may be owned by this particular team or service. So from that moment onwards, they take on and do what they need to do. Another feature from Snowflake is data sharing. So it's very easy to set up and full control. We do use it in our security lake. That is another big important use case. Applications, we have simple pipelines in which we aggregate data that produce in single analytics dataset. As an example, we have a customer facing analytics for the customer happiness team, in which they are able to query for particular users and see the last sort of events that they have been doing for better helpful. just conscious about time. I'm gonna speed through the last slides. Sorry if I'm too fast. Impact, insights, and savings. We were able to share data, replace paid products with our own, and it's a big one. Separated pipelines, so then we have like micro pipelines. There's not one big transform. Every data mart has its own compute engine, its own schedule, its own pipeline. And the warehouse latency, we are moving towards a low latency with high concurrency pipelines. And that concludes the end of our session.